Ariel, listen to me. The human world, it's a mess. Life under the sea is better than anything they got up there. The seaweed is...
Hi, Room 21 Rockstars, and welcome to our first ever review video for either science or social studies. This time around, it is the Ocean Unit review video. So you're probably saying, what in the world am I going to get out of this? And what am I going to need? So a couple of the things that I would probably have handy, number one, would be something to write with. So I just found a marker. It could be a pencil, pen, anything like that. And then some paper. You know, you can, if you don't have any paper, you can use the back of a cereal box, a newspaper, anything you can possibly think of to maybe write on. You could also complete this outside on the sidewalk if it's nice, okay? You just need something maybe to write on because we're going to be doing a little bit of that. Now, the reason that we're going to have study videos all year long and that it's going to be an option for you to use them is because what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you ways that you can start to study at home in preparation for middle school, you know, because this year I'm not giving you the study guides that you were used to in years past, because you may not be receiving those when you get to middle school. So I want you to find study strategies that are really going to work for you. And as soon as you find those, you're going to love them. You know, I'm going to share some that I used when I was in college to make sure that I was successful when I was studying. So our test is coming up on Tuesday, guys, and a couple things I just want to cover. First of all, would be some of the very basic facts about the oceans. So right now, what is the percentage of water approximately that covers planet Earth? Write it down, think about it, anything you would like to do. What do you think? What is the percentage? Remember, it's approximate. Okay, is this what you came upon? 70% water, 30% land. So 70% of the Earth is covered in water, 30% is covered in land. So it's pretty crazy to think that the 5 oceans of the world really are taking up most of the area of the entire planet. Now, I just want to make sure you have this down, and this is something that's actually going to come up in social studies this week when we start to talk about the continents and the regions of North America. But I would like you just to draw the world really quickly, and when I mean draw, I'm talking, okay, here's my North America. Check this out, guys. These are my continents. Okay, I'm not taking too much time, but I want to make sure that I can place the 5 oceans in their appropriate areas on the globe. So I quickly drew the world, okay? And now what I want to do is, I know there are 5 oceans. I know we have the Atlantic and the Pacific, the Indian, the Southern, and the Arctic. So go ahead and label them as I say them. So we have the Atlantic, and we have the Pacific, and we have the Arctic, and we have the Indian, and we have the Southern. Okay, so this is probably what you should have found. If we are here in North America, we live right about here. We have the Atlantic here, huge ocean. The Pacific is the biggest ocean, if you remember our very first beach day there when we learned about that. The Arctic Ocean, the Southern Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. Okay, just to make sure that you know how to place those, that's a good first step. Now, so we know that Earth is covered in 70% of water, 30% land, and we also know where the oceans are located. Now, if you guys can think back to that first day when we talked about the ocean floor, you know, I had you close your eyes and I had you actually draw what I was reading as I was saying it out loud. And I basically said to you, okay, we're now walking into the ocean, okay? And we step out onto a very kind of flat piece of land. The water's not too deep, and then we have a sudden slope, okay? So what I want you to do is get your next sheet of paper, okay? Now, you may want to use the actual diagram that we took in class, and we labeled the different parts of the ocean floor, but you may also just want to take a sheet of paper. Okay, so if I just take a plain sheet of paper, I'm going to try to draw the ocean floor first. So do that right now without any labeling. Just draw what the ocean floor looks like and try to include all of those features, guys, that we talked about. Do that right now. I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, you may want to pause, okay, but I am going to continue on. Here's what I have, okay? So I basically have land is over here and here, okay? And then this is where we get into the water. Okay, now what I want us to do is actually label them. So what I'm going to do right now, and I want you to follow along, okay, I'm not going to show you my completed yet, but I want you to write in the names. Don't worry about the spelling right now. All I want you guys to focus on is actually labeling what you need to know. So this first part, here are the clues. Ready? This is a shoreline where the land meets the ocean, basically where we swim if we go on vacation at the beach. This is the most shallow part of the ocean, and almost 90% of the marine organisms that live in the entire ocean live in this area. What is the name of that part of the ocean floor called, guys? Okay. You should have had down continental shelf. Okay, so keep going. I'm not going to show you my labels yet. The next part starts at the shelf and goes down. Okay, there's a slope. So if we start at the shelf and it drops off, what is that called? Okay, that should have been the continental slope. Remember, it's not always just a deep drop off. It could be gradual. Okay, it is a slope. The next area, this is a large flat part of the ocean floor. What is that called? Okay, you should have labeled the Abyssal Plain. The next part, the deep part that is like the deep part of the ocean that is like a giant crack. Goes down for miles. Humans have not been able to explore most areas of this part of the ocean floor. What would that be? Good, that is a trench. And finally, the part of the ocean where it piles up from deposits on the ocean floor and begins to rise again, which kind of gives it away. That is the Continental Rise. Good, yes. Now, before I reveal, I want to just hit home that Continental Rise real quick. So let's just go ahead through, okay? And here's what I would do. You know, I just gave you guys the clues. So I would make sure I'm double checking my work. If you come upon something that you missed or did not understand, that's an area that maybe you want to star on your paper, go back to, double check your notes later on, or go back into your textbook later to kind of check it out and say, hey, how did I miss this, okay? So a couple areas that I want us to look at right now. This would be where we're swimming. So I'm going to draw a human here, okay? Now this is the shelf. This is a continental shelf, okay? Now this would be the continental slope. Okay, now this would be my plain here. I know I didn't have much space, but this would be my abyssal plain, that flat part of the ocean. This would be a volcano, obviously, but it would also be a seamount, because remember I told you that a seamount is like a mountain that kind of stands alone. So it could be either. It could be the seamount or the volcano. Okay, these are my deep sea trenches. And then I wanted to talk about the Continental Rise. And here's why, guys, okay? Because what we learned the other day was that, and let me see if I can find us another marker. What we learned is that we have these underwater rivers. What are those called? Good, currents. So we have these underwater rivers kind of going through the ocean, okay? Now, we know that, and I told you that the bottom of the ocean floor is covered in sediments, just pieces of rock and sand that have kind of been washed away. Well, if you think about it, those currents are carrying those sediments. So if they're being taken in the currents, okay, think about that current. Well, what it's doing is it's piling up all of that sediment right here at the rise. Okay, so those currents, those underwater rivers are flowing, 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 and in those currents is carrying that sediment, those tiny pieces of sand and rock, and it's causing that to pile up on the rise of the continent, okay? And that's kind of why it becomes a rise again. So make sure you're familiar with the parts of the ocean floor, but also those descriptions, guys. So I just gave you those descriptions. That's a really important part that you need to make sure you get down as well, okay? Think about the ocean floor, the day that we were that we went to the beach, all of those great things. Okay, that will help you to remember a little bit more about the ocean floor. Now, the next thing that I want to do is talk about the layers of the ocean. Okay, now we talked about the different marine organisms, things that live there, but I don't want you to spend too much time on that. Now, let me show you what I would create for the layers of the ocean floor. So we know that there are 3 of them, if you guys recall. Let me just move some papers out of the way. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sheet of paper, I'm going to draw the ocean across the top, okay? And I'm going to label my 3 layers. So we had sunlight, twilight going down, and midnight. Now, it may be helpful for you guys to actually list everything you can remember that happens at each of those layers. That may be helpful. But the major thing that I really want us to focus on in preparation for our test, and that you really need to make sure that you have down in your mind, are what happens as we go deeper. Okay? What happens to the heat? What happens to the pressure? And what happens to the salinity? Remember, salinity is what, guys? The amount of salt in the ocean. Yes, so remember that experiment where we took 2 bottles, we had one with salt water, we had one with fresh water, we tipped them, and the salt water went down to the bottom of the bottle, the blue, or whatever color you decided, and the fresh water stayed on top. It kind of floated, because we know that salt water, okay, because it has that salt in it, it is more dense than fresh water. Okay, so the salinity of the ocean is very important to keep in mind. Now, maybe a little true-false question to kind of play with the salinity. True or false, is the salinity in the ocean the same everywhere? Think about it for a second. No. Remember, it is not. Because think about that iceberg picture that I showed you. That iceberg was made of fresh water. As it's melting, that fresh water is going into the ocean, and it's kind of diluting the salt water. Or think about a river that's flowing into the ocean. You have fresh water flowing into the ocean, so that salt water is not going to have the same salinity as the salt water down in the deep trenches. And remember that heavier salt water is going to go to the bottom of the ocean. So think about the Bill Nye the Science Guy video that I showed you guys. That water really went the whole way down. Okay? So what I want you to do with these 3 layers, it's okay if you know. I would love for you to know what organisms live in each of these, but that's not what we're going to concentrate on today, guys. We're actually going to concentrate on something else. So if I draw this arrow going downward, okay, and it is kind of highlighted so it's hard to see, what happens to the temperature of the water as I go from the surface of the ocean down? What happens to the temperature? Good, it goes down. Okay, so I want to put the word temperature. Because I need to know that the temperature goes down as I go deeper down the ocean. Now, what happens to the salinity as I get deeper in the ocean? It increases. Good. So the temperature decreases, and this is all I would do, and the salinity increases. Okay, so the temperature decreases, the salinity increases. Because remember, down here at the bottom of the ocean, that's where the salt is concentrated because it has a higher density. Okay, and finally, what happens to the pressure? Think about the fact that human beings cannot really get past that twilight into the midnight zone. Why is that? Remember I showed you the cup? And it was a mighty strong cup that day. And I was stacking books and books and books and books and books on top of it. But why is that? Yes, because the pressure increases, okay? So if a submarine tried to go down in here into the midnight zone, it would literally be crushed because of the pressure and the temperature. It's extremely cold down there. So as you go deeper, the pressure increases, okay? Because think about it, all that water is kind of pushing down on top. So as you get deeper in the ocean, you have a greater pressure. And you have fewer organisms because the water has such a high salinity that not many organisms can really live down in that area. The final thing that I really want to talk to you guys about today, well, really 2 things. Number 1, we need to know the difference between tides, currents, and waves. Okay, now, if you look into your science textbook, okay, there are 3 wonderful pages that you guys can read if you'd like that will help you to tell the difference between the waves, tides, and currents. Not to mention, I gave you this study tool that will also help with that. But what I would do, okay, at home to kind of help you to determine the difference between waves, tides, and currents, would actually be to make a kind of a three-way T-chart. So watch what I do a second. Okay, so this is basically what I did. Okay, it's nothing neat, but here's another strategy that I can think of. Now, before I look at any of my notes, I want to see what I can recall about waves, tides, and currents. Now, you know, guys, back when I was in elementary school and when I was in high school specifically, and I would struggle on tests, I think it was because I was thinking too hard or trying too hard to recall facts or different things that we learned in class about different concepts. So if I literally just put these waves, tides, and currents down, okay, and I just take a second, I try to release all of the stress in them. Oh man, I got to remember as much as I can about each of these, and literally say to myself, okay, waves. What are waves caused by? Okay. Oh man, they're caused by wind mostly. Sometimes by different currents. Okay. So when we have a hurricane, that's why we have taller waves. And how do waves travel? Well, they have energy that is traveling through the water. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is simply to just write down what you can remember about waves, tides, and currents, and then go back to that three-way chart. Okay, now what you might want to actually do is take those cards that we glued into your notebook, recreate them on a note card, and have a sort. Okay, but here I am about to quiz you, okay? So this is another way that you can use to study. You know, if you have somebody at home, they can kind of help you. They can say a fact or something else that we learned, and then you can try to recall what was that. Okay, so what would this describe? Waves, tides, or currents? Too high and too low of these every day. What would that be, guys? Good. Yes, those would be tides. Okay, this is caused by the gravitational pull of the moon. What would that be? Good, the tides. Okay, these travel in large circular patterns and are bounded by large land masses. What would that be? Travel in large circular patterns and are bounded by large land masses. Good, those are currents. Okay, and an example of a current would be the Gulf Stream current. Okay, and what I actually did was I drew the USA. I put a star where we live. Okay, and I know that this underwater river that flows, one such example of a current would be called the Gulf Stream current. That's the one that we really want to know. That actually has an impact upon our weather. Okay, so that's a really important current to keep in mind. What are some of the causes of currents, guys? Think about that for a second. Well, definitely the salinity, okay? The salinity of the water would be one of them. Now, here's a few more. Are you ready? This would be the rise and the fall of sea level. Good, that's tides. This is the up and down movement in the ocean caused by wind blowing across the ocean surface. That would be considered what, everyone? Waves, good. These are rivers that flow in the ocean, which are caused by wind, temperature of the water, and salinity of the water. Those would be called currents. Good. So that's another good way for you guys to review the waves, tides, and currents. Now, the final thing that I want to study with you guys today would be the food chains. Okay, that we talked about for a couple of days in class. We played a few games. We dissected fish stomachs to kind of see that relationship. Now, there's a really cool video that I posted, or that game that I showed you guys on our Class Fusion page. That would be an excellent way to review the food chains and food webs that persist in the environment. Now, basically what I did here was I drew, okay, and let me just show you this side of it. I drew a food chain, okay? So try to produce an ocean food chain right now on paper. Now remember, we drew the food chain as kind of a pyramid, as a triangle, okay? Because we talked about how the energy decreases as you go up the food chain. So every food chain is going to start with the sun, okay? Now the main producer in the ocean food chain would be called what? Think SpongeBob. Write it down if you can remember. I'm going to do the same thing. Yes, good. It's called photoplankton, guys, okay? Now, what could possibly eat photoplankton? Well, probably some type of fish, Okay, and then up above that you may have sharks are eating the fish, and then maybe humans could be eating the shark. Okay, that's just one such example of the food chain. But the reason that it's in a pyramid, and be able to explain this, is because there is more energy down here. We have to have a ton more photoplankton here than we have fish here, than we have sharks. If we had 1,000 sharks and only 10 photoplankton, the whole food chain would be disrupted. Okay, so make sure you know that photoplankton is the plant organism in the ocean that not only supplies that is not only the producer for the food chains in the ocean, but also supplies a ton of oxygen to us here on the land. Okay, now one final thing that I want to walk you guys through for the oceans to review, and let me make sure that I hit everything that I wanted to. Is if you go in your textbook, now if you bring in all of these materials that you reviewed and you tell me the code word, I am going to rock the ocean test, you will get yourself 5 house points. So if you bring in all of the sheets that you used to review and you tell me the code, you need those both together, I am going to rock the ocean test, you will get yourself 5 house points. Now another way to earn a few house points and to help yourself review and become successful in this test, and remember I have my teacher edition in front of me so it's going to look a tiny bit different, is to go to the Unit 11 review, which is on page 533 of your textbook, volume 2. Okay, this review is very challenging. Okay, it's going to give you different diagrams, different ways to help you review, but it's also another good strategy to use. Now keep in mind there are a few questions on there, and I'll talk to you in class tomorrow about them, that we did not cover, things that we did not talk about that are not part of our SOLs. Okay, so I'll let you know which ones those are. Now if you complete that Unit 11 review on page 533 of your science textbook, you will get yourself another 5 house points. Okay, so in all you can get yourself 10 house points if you work hard on this part of the ocean review. Now, just a reminder, guys, the whole idea of our review of this ocean review of the study videos that I'll post all throughout the year is for you to find ways that you can work on studying at home by yourself or with somebody who is at home without the use of that study guide. How can you recall and how can you bring back and apply all of those things that we learned, that we experimented with during our unit for the test on Tuesday? Okay, so flip through that interactive notebook that we've been creating. Go back to the labs that we did in class, guys, and think about all of those different experiments that we performed and the outcomes that we found. How can you fully explain and internalize the oceans there for you? You are going to be so successful in the oceans test on Tuesday. Just work hard and you will certainly get smart with some awesome, effective effort. I'm very proud of you, rock stars. If you have any questions, please let me know. And thank you for watching the ocean study video. #OceansRock. See you.